The following work is brought to you by ScriptCrib. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon for more information on our works. And as always, if you want to know more about what we're doing and be up to date when we release it, always like and subscribe. The heat from the sun was immense as he stood on top of the bluff, staring out into the distance. On his right, the ruins of a once bustling suburban neighborhood stood as a reminder of what the human race once was and what it was once capable of. To his left, in the far distance of his periphery, was the entrance to the suburban metropolis of Soda City. Around him, a circular shadow covered the ground that mimicked the hat that was adorned on his head. He smirked as his hands remained perfectly at his side. His long coat was just a few inches off the ground as he watched a four-wheeled vehicle leave the remains of the suburban sprawl on its way back towards Soda City. The sinister grin grew as he watched it move rapidly across the arid ground, sending up sand and dust into the air. Like a predator stalking his prey, he took his first step towards Soda City, keeping his empty eyes affixed to the metallic entrance. It was several miles away, but it didn't matter. He moved with purpose along the dusty ground, ignoring the harsh climate of the earth. No matter the radiation or thick air, he moved at a deliberate pace towards Soda City, as if that's where his prey's nest was located. The entrance to Soda City was just like the rest of the subterranean cities of Eden. Located on the surface, in a dangerous climate, the entrance to the city was open to the elements. The floor of the entrance was solid steel, while the outpost, consisting of a small building with thick plexiglass windows, was full of a few sensors and radios. A staircase, followed by a lift to the city, was located just past it, but everyone who came through the entrance was forced to check in with Poe. Most of the technology was located below the surface, though several machines made the area safer than outside in the arid wasteland. Once an Outlander stepped onto the metallic floor, the air was immediately cleansed by several machines. The impurities were dispersed back out into the arid wasteland through a series of vacuums, and thermal sensors immediately detected if the Outlander was carrying any known communicable diseases from the surface. On the metallic floor, the post soldiers were safe to patrol. If they were to take one step out onto the arid ground, they would be immediately forced to quarantine. However, the need for soldiers on the surface was justified, as Outlander settlements were scattered throughout the earth. "There is nothing out here," announced a post soldier as he sat in the command post on the surface, guarding the entrance to Soda City while reading a newspaper. Turning the page slowly, he leaned back in his wooden chair, resting it comfortably on two legs while propping his feet on the nearest counter. His job was trivial, boring, and his goal was to only make it through the day. "Just relax. You'll be through with this assignment soon enough," replied the other soldier, standing and looking out the command post at the barren wasteland that surrounded it. "Every recruit has to work the entrance for a few months." "I've been here for 5, he quipped back, looking over his newspaper at the other soldier. He smirked as he turned and walked toward the entrance to the city. "Just relax," he said, walking away toward the staircase. "This will all be over before you know it. Besides, the likelihood of anyone approaching is remote. Any direct exposure to the rays of the sun for more than a few minutes will lead to imminent death. For anyone to survive out there, let alone walk up to Soda City, is to trek through blistering heat and deadly rays of the sun." "But there are a few settlements out there," countered the other soldier. "Why anyone would choose to live out in that wasteland is beyond me, but they exist. They choose to not live by our laws. They choose to abandon the principles of civilization and instead embrace anarchy and chaos. Living out in the wasteland is asking for death. They would rather rely on the haphazard and lawless syndicate to provide for them instead of the safety and serenity of Eden," he retorted proudly. The senior post soldier walked down the staircase, leaving the other to sit in the covered command post to read his newspaper and attempt to enjoy the day. Time passed slowly as he turned the pages, admiring the pictures and reading the current events, but his mind began to wander. He flipped to the final page when he heard a distant rustling noise. The soldier's heart skipped a beat as his eyes followed the figure in the distance, striding slickly through the dust and ash-filled wasteland. He watched in awe as the mysterious man moved closer. His long tan coat, stained from hours spent on his journey, flapped wildly like an unfurled banner, revealing russet trousers tucked into boots held by rusting buckles. As he reached the command post, he saw the soldier standing in anticipation, and with a single nod of his long-brimmed hat, he continued forward toward the entrance, ignoring the soldier and his newspaper. "Excuse me," announced the soldier, confused at the attire and his location. "Can we help you, Outlander?" The man continued to walk toward the soldier, ignoring his greeting and pressing toward the city. The guard, perturbed at the deviation in his day, stepped back into the command tent and reached for his radio. "HQ, this is the entrance command post. I have an Outlander approaching." The soldier held the radio tightly as the man entered the post, slowing his speed greatly and walking toward the soldier. "Can I help you, Outlander? You have entered the territory of Soda City, a city of Eden. Please halt or I'll be forced to subdue you." The Outlander paused briefly. The sand of the wastelands fell from his boots and onto the solid floor. He glared at the post soldier with eyes of molten gold as he slowly lifted his arms, a malicious smile curling on his lips. Abruptly, his hand moved rapidly away from his body, clutching a lethal blade that moved in a lightning flash out of the sleeve of his jacket. In a single, rapid motion, the blade sliced at the post soldier's defenseless neck. Without any resistance, the post soldier's head was severed from the neck and rolled across the ground, away from his body. Blood pooled out of his neck as he dropped to his knees and then onto his stomach. "Noted, command post," announced a voice over the radio as the man walked down the stairs, placing his blade back in his coat and sealing his sleeve. Down the stairs stood the other soldier, leaning against a pole next to the entrance to an elevator. The man walked up and nodded to the soldier as he stood in front of the elevator as the soldier looked him over. The soldier stared up the stairs, narrowing his eyes as he regarded the Outlander beside him. "You showed your identification?" The man nodded and the soldier's gaze returned to the stairs, where a slow stream of blood was bathing them in an eerie scarlet glow. He could almost feel its heat radiating off the steps, trickling down like a river of torment. Everything seemed to stand still as the Outlander drew his sword and thrust it forward. "No!" he cried out, watching in horror as the blade slowly cut through the air and sunk into his abdomen. The pain was unbearable and sent shockwaves throughout his body. His opponent extracted the weapon from his flesh and moved swiftly for his neck. He felt a coldness on his throat before a sharp snap made him aware of what had happened. The Outlander had severed the soldier's head from his body. Just like the soldier on the surface, the Outlander's freshest victim descended to his knees and onto his chest as blood poured out his neck and onto the floor. As the doors to the elevator opened, revealing an unsuspecting crowd of men, women, and children, he stepped off the lift wearing a smug smirk on his face. The doors closed behind him, leaving with a resounding finality, leaving his second victim still covering the floor with blood. Hey guys, the next part's going to begin in just a second, but if you're enjoying this and you like stuff in this genre, why don't you check out By Gods and Kings, Shadow's Bastion by Karen Graham. The War of the Gods has come to a head with 9 of the 11 gods involved in open conflicts with one another. The god of order, Darien, with his allies, Xylene, Saeria, and Talgus, have crafted the plans to create a prison of souls off the banks of the Sariak River. Using 2 of his priests as the conduits for the plan, Darien puts his scheme into motion to create the ultimate bastion of shadows, the Sunshire Stockades. You can find this work on Amazon, the By Gods and Kings podcast channel, or you can find it on the Script Crib Publishing YouTube channel. Now, we continue with the next part. In the command room of a 2-story military compound, Captain Louis Preo worked with his team of 3 soldiers to monitor traffic and movements throughout the city. Every level of the city, from the sewers and subways that flowed beneath the asphalt streets to the catwalks that connected several of the buildings throughout the city, were constantly monitored by Poe. "All is quiet in the streets, sir," said Sergeant Grigor Pottinger as the captain walked along behind him. Captain Preo, pensive after the events earlier that day with Mitten, looked over the monitors as different scenes appeared. Traveling through each view for only a few seconds, he looked as closely as possible before it changed. The street cameras showed shops with blacked out windows and closed doors, most likely waiting to open during business hours again the following morning. A long road started at one camera and wound away from his field of view. There was no way to know where it led, if there were buildings or people living on it. People walked down empty streets and crossed them without fear of anything happening, but Captain Preo could not shake off the feeling that something was wrong. As he watched more footage, pictures and clips of every shot played over and over in a never-ending cycle. He thought about how they would handle this situation when Mitten woke up. He decided it wouldn't be wise to take any chances. The captain gave the order to switch to the entrance camera, eager to see if the Outlander had caused any trouble for his subordinate. Without hesitation, the soldier complied. He changed the view to show the cameras at the command post, looking out into the arid wasteland in front of Soda City. On the screen, Preo leaned forward to see nothing, not even a glimpse of the 2 individuals who should have been there. The post soldier was not at his post, and the Outlander was not standing there for surveillance. "Where is he?" asked Preo harshly. The other technicians glanced away from the captain, averting their eyes so that they wouldn't see him. A heavy silence was all that greeted him. Preo seethed under his breath as Sergeant Pottinger, the lead technician, slid the cameras around. With Preo still over his shoulder, he depressed a few buttons on his keyboard, hoping to find what he was looking for. The camera changed quickly to find what Preo was searching for, but not what he wanted to see. On the screen in front of him, a post soldier was lying headless on the ground in a pool of his own blood. Preo gasped at the terrible sight on the screen. He sprinted towards the wall, his breathing heavy. He yanked the large, red lever, setting off a screeching alarm that bellowed throughout Poe headquarters. He reached over on the wall and scrambled for the nearby transceiver. "This is Commanding Officer Louis Preo. All soldiers report to breach stations immediately. We have an attack and 1 confirmed casualty, maybe more. I repeat, all soldiers report to breach stations now. Captain Preo spun on his heels and glared at the monitors. I want all of you to find out this man's whereabouts and who he is, he shouted as he made his way out of the monitoring room. The analysts in the room began frantically tapping at their keyboards, moving from camera to find the Outlander, while Preo made his way toward the barracks and the armory. As he made his way toward frantic soldiers equipping themselves as rapidly as possible, the thought of the headless soldier sent chills down his spine. Armor was crashing against the metal floor of the armory as each post soldier tossed on what fit, hoping to answer Captain Preo's call before the others. Subduing the threat first meant glory. Glory meant a commendation and potentially a promotion. The doors to the command center sprung open as the post soldiers emerged. The first two soldiers out of the building were Victor and Justin, both calm and carrying their weapons as they made their way onto the helipad where an air transport was waiting to take off. The engines were humming as the transport vibrated gently, waiting for the post soldiers to arrive. Justin was in his full equipment, including a helmet with shield. In his hands, a large rifle was wired to his wrists, which were connected to the computer that controlled his suit. Justin glanced at the gun holstered at Victor's hip as they stepped onto the transport. "Why do you even carry a gun?" he asked. Victor let out a low sigh and shrugged. "They tell me I have to have it," he replied, settling into a chair behind the pilot. He clasped his hands on the man's shoulder. "David," he said in an easy voice, "how's my favorite pilot doing?" The pilot turned around and offered a polite nod. "I'm well, sir," he replied before turning back to the controls. As 6 more soldiers took their seats, the transport began to hum with power and the doors closed shut. Monitors installed on one wall showed thermal readings of the area, detecting life forms and other objects that didn't seem quite right. Justin shifted in his seat from the cockpit. "Victor," he called out, resting his elbows on the armrest and leaning forward slightly. "Do you know if a ground transport made it out before us?" "I'm sure one was patrolling," he replied, analyzing the monitors as they approached the entrance. Captain Preo sent out a pretty broad message to all available soldiers. "I'm sure they were in the area." David nodded as Justin looked on at another monitor. "I see what you're looking at, David," he said as he stared at the monitor. "I'm seeing a ground transport down there, but I'm not seeing any thermal readings to suggest active life. Wait, I see one coming out of the tunnel." Victor peered out of the cockpit at the desperate soldier sprinting from the tunnel. "Soldier, identify!" he barked through the headset linked to his helmet. "Kron," came the strained reply as Kron stumbled to a halt in front of them. The battalion leader responsible for capturing Reginald Mitten was on the ground, defending Soda City from whatever had invaded. His face contorted in anguish as he gasped for breath. We've got 4 dead down here and 2 more injured. Buck managed to make it to the elevator only to find that a massacre had taken place." Victor glanced over at Justin before turning back to the soldier. "Buck, can you hear me?" Victor called out, his voice level yet stern. The air hung heavy with silence until a crackling broke it. "Vic, I hear you," came Buck's slow reply. Victor nodded and let out a deep exhale. "Can you send us visuals so we know what we're up against?" A brief pause followed before Buck touched his wrist pad, which sent several images to the ship hovering nearby. Justin looked on but had to turn away immediately, recoiling from the gruesome sight of the carnage below them. "What do we know?" asked Justin, his face pale and voice trembling. Kron took a deep breath as both Victor and Justin looked at him through the monitor. Kron was regarded as an ever-steady presence, but in Victor and Justin's eyes, he appeared rattled. "Kron, take a deep breath and tell me what you saw," inserted Victor in a calming voice. Justin watched as Kron struggled to take a full, deep breath from his exhaustion. He could hear the labored breathing of everyone on the line whining loudly in his ear with each breath Kron took. He would be panicked too if he were in their place, but events like this would test them beyond measure. For now, there was only one thing to do: wait for Kron to regain his composure. "He wears a long coat and a long brim hat," described Kron. "He moves wicked fast too and keeps a small sword up his sleeve. We can't keep up with him." "Right," said Justin. "David, can you go high up and get us a long-range scan? Buck, Kron, get to safety. See if we can keep him pinned into a small area. We've got to keep civilian casualties to a minimum," instructed Justin, trying his best to take charge while panic ensued beneath them in the streets. Kron took a deep breath with Buck at his side, looking out into the area they had escaped. "Copy," he said with a brief hesitation. The video screen went blank as Kron complied with Justin's command, leaving the transport to begin their ascent. The ship lurched upwards toward the plate slowly, a few feet at a time. Victor made his way to the front of the cockpit with David, while Justin stared intently forward at the large, pod-shaped monitor in front of him. Preset buttons darted all around while they moved into place, a series of sensations that he had not thought of or noticed until very recently. Finally, David reached out and tugged on some sort of lever, and the world outside appeared in crisp detail in front of Justin. Scanning rapidly, they took in as much ground as possible with each passing second. After a few scans, Justin gasped and looked away from the screen reluctantly. "David, you're up here a lot, right?" he asked calmly, pointing at an oddity in front of them hanging from the center of the plate. Have you ever noticed that? David locked his eyes in front of him, immediately noticing the man they were searching for was dangling from one of the rafters that held up the plate. David contorted his eyes and tilted his head at what was before him. He quickly switched on the sensors and scanned for any sign of life, but there was none. Suddenly, a man plummeted from the plate onto a nearby building full of antennas and satellites. "That's our relay connection," Victor barked as he watched the man slash away wildly with a sword, destroying their connection to the other cities of Eden. They watched in horror as the Outlander destroyed their communications before turning away from the transport. David snapped the ship into position and took aim as the figure leapt from one roof to another. "Ready your clips, guys! I'm going to fire and keep him pinned down so you can grab him." His voice boomed over the commotion as bullets whizzed through the air toward the targets. David turned the transport as it rained down several rounds of ammunition toward the Outlander. As he leapt across the gap between another set of buildings, David quickly fired a targeted round at the point of the Outlander's landing, causing an avalanche of debris at the spot. As the Outlander's feet hit the falling rubble, he plummeted backwards 18 stories and crashed into the ground below where several soldiers were waiting. During David's maneuvering, Victor, Justin, and the rest of the soldiers on board David's transport descended down to the street below to intercept, using the propulsion system on their suits to steady the fall. As they approached, they noticed the body of the Outlander lying still on what was once a functional vehicle. The impact from the Outlander crushed the vehicle and potentially all of his bones. "Careful, everyone," Victor warned as he and his team cautiously approached with their weapons drawn. "We don't know what this guy is capable of." "He just fell 18 stories and landed on a car, Vic," one of the men chided back sarcastically. "He's done for now." "Proceed with caution," Victor reiterated as they gathered around him. Suddenly, the hand of the Outlander twitched slightly, pushing them back in surprise. In a single swift movement, he sprang onto his feet, pulling out a sword and swinging downward with all his might, slicing one of the soldiers clean in 2 pieces. The soldiers blasted their weapons at him, forcing him to dodge the hail of bullets and dive for cover behind the wreckage of the car. "Hold it right there," commanded the soldier as he moved in to take him into custody. In an instant, the Outlander whipped out his sword from his sleeve, prompting the soldier to fire his weapon. With a single, rapid swipe, the Outlander deflected the bullet and launched it back at the soldier, drilling it directly into his right eye. As the soldier dropped to the ground, the Poe soldier stopped firing. "He's deflecting bullets!" shouted a soldier over the radio. "We can't get a lock on him." The Outlander sighed loudly during the pause and leapt high into the air, heading back up the 18 stories that he fell. He landed on the rooftop, right in the crosshairs of David. He locked onto the Outlander, but the sound of Victor coming through the radio gave him pause. "Cease fire!" bellowed Victor. "We can't afford to have him send you to the ground, David. We're coming up." Victor glanced over at Justin and the others as they activated the propulsion on their suits. Instantly, the Poe soldiers ascended the building to meet the Outlander on the rooftop, where he was waiting on them. The Outlander smirked menacingly as he unleashed a flurry of swings at the soldiers, cutting them down one by one and flinging their lifeless corpses away. He sprinted towards the rooftop and with an incredible leap soared through the air, landing amidst Victor's team who were all aiming their guns at him. "Don't shoot!" screamed Victor assertively as he walked toward the Outlander. He held his sword firmly in his right hand as the blood of his victims dripped down from the hilt and puddled on the rooftop. Victor paused and remained still, the chip in his back already active and ready for him to defeat the assailant. "What are you?" inquired Victor. The Poe soldiers stood on the rooftop with their weapons trained on the assassin. The silence was deafening, but it was also fleeting. As the question left Victor's lips, the man tossed his sword violently at one of the Poe soldiers, impaling his face before he lunged toward Victor. Victor's heart raced as he watched the blade dart across the rooftop and instantly reacted with terror to the Outlander charging forward, driving his fist into Victor's face. Victor stumbled back, unable to comprehend what just happened before a second punch shattered his ribs. Gasping for air, he looked over at Justin, who had pulled out his gun, but it was too late. The assassin yanked the gun from Justin's hands before registering a powerful punch straight to his face and threw him over the edge of the building and onto a catwalk a floor down. The Outlander darted over to the soldier who was impaled by his sword. He grabbed the handle and yanked it out, spilling blood all around the fresh corpse. As another soldier charged in, the Outlander swung his sword swiftly and precisely. In one swift motion, he decapitated the oncoming soldier before hurling it at another. In a matter of seconds, only Victor remained on the roof. He had regained his senses and charged full force at the Outlander, who had murdered several of his allies and friends in cold blood. Victor lunged forward with his left fist streaking through the air. As the Outlander turned, Victor's left fist connected with his jaw. The sound of a sickening crack was audible to any who were around, though it was only Victor and the Outlander on the rooftop. Blood sprayed from the Outlander's face as Victor stepped in and threw his right hand up in a stunning roundhouse punch that drove the man back several steps. With a cry of rage, Victor closed the distance again and delivered a powerful uppercut that shook the Outlander to his core. His sword went up weakly as he staggered, desperately trying to parry Victor's next attack, but it was too late. Victor raced in with an earth-shattering roar, driving his fists into the man's face until he toppled backwards off the building. Justin clambered his way back onto the rooftop, and what he saw made his stomach twist. Victor had decimated the Outlander with a few blows, sending him spiraling off the building and into the streets below. No signs of life. Looks like he got away. David's voice crackled over the air transport's radio, using sensors to track the location of the Outlander. But that didn't give Justin peace of mind as he stared at Victor's hand. The glove that Victor wore to protect his knuckles had a trace amount of blood on it from the Outlander. "Come on down, David," Justin yelled urgently. "We need to get this thing to the lab before he strikes again. Maybe we can find out who this Outlander truly is."